This is the How Design Live podcast, hosted by programming partner Ilise Benun, national speaker, author of 7 business books for creative professionals, and founder of marketing-mentor.com. Listen to her lively conversations with past and future How Design Live speakers about the business of creativity and creativity in business. Here's Ilise Benun.
What does it mean to sell when you're a creative person building a business? Do you imagine you have to be a pushy person? If so, it would make sense that you're avoiding it. But Maria Rapetskaya has found a way to sell that fits her style and that she's comfortable with, as well as a realistic mindset about the importance of building relationships. Along the way, she developed a thicker skin and she adjusted her expectations. In our interview, she admitted that this took her a while to grasp. Her attitude was getting in the way. Maybe that's happening for you too. Listen and learn. Hello, Maria. Welcome to the HOWLive podcast.
Thank you, Elise. Great to be here.
Please introduce yourself.
So my name is Maria Rapetskaya, and I am a creative director, a motion graphics artist, and I am also the founder and owner of a motion graphics agency called Undefined Creative, and we're based in New York, and we're quite a small business. I also do a bit of writing and mentoring. I've done a couple of articles for 99U, Fast Company, Entrepreneur in the past. And I generally just enjoy sharing my knowledge and all of the mistakes and wrong turns that I made along the way before I actually got to own and run a successful company with other people who may be interested.
Excellent. And I do want to talk a little bit about some of those mistakes and what you learned. But first, tell me what your definition is of a design entrepreneur.
Well, I think it's interesting because designers and just creative people in general, I think, are a bit of a different breed. And I know for myself and a lot of my friends who are creative, people tend to think of running a business as kind of this ideal creative freedom, perspective of I'm going to be my own boss and I'm going to take on the projects that I want to do. And I think in that regard, design entrepreneurs, are very different. Generally speaking, folks who went to art school don't come out knowing much about business or finance. And so while there's a lot of amazing things about design entrepreneurship, I think the one thing that really separates it from any other entrepreneurship is, this just the way that creative people tend to think. Now, on the upside of that, we are creative. And so we're a lot more likely to come up with ideas that are really out of the box, different ways of running companies, ways that may be quite different from what's even accepted at the current moment.
And did you go to art school?
I did. And I came out with 0 business or financial literacy.
Where did you go?
I went to University of the Arts in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. And so why is it, do you think, that they don't teach that?
Well, I think a lot has definitely changed in the last, almost 20 years since I've graduated. And I'm hoping that, they're teaching a bit more these days, although in my couple of forays into teaching undergraduate, I've realized that it's nowhere near as much. I think art school has always just been this very interesting place where the idea is really to focus in on your talent and to really work with your particular field. And, it's really about the work that you produce. And it's wonderful in that respect because very few of us, after we graduate, have this 4-year stretch of working on our ideas and being encouraged about our ideas. And, there's also this whole idea about artists not traditionally being business people, right? This notion of selling out, especially back in the 90s when I was in school, it was huge. And so I think art schools had this tendency to shy away from talking to students about topics like what happens if you want to start a creative business. even things like job hunts and portfolios were sort of secondary to your career as an individual artist.
And do you see things having changed in the business world or in the marketplace such that the schools now realize that they do need to prepare students for either starting their own business or at least getting a job when the competition is much stiffer?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think just the amount of potential careers for commercial artists in general has grown so much. The digital art industry opened up so many doors, myself included. I don't know that I would be a successful commercial artist if I got a degree in animation in, 1975, for example. So I think they're definitely realizing that clearly education costs a good chunk more, and so it has to be justified in many different ways. But, there's really only so much that you can learn in 4 years. And I think it's also an age thing. At 18, 19, 20, 21, you kind of think that you have it all figured out, and you're super optimistic, and those are really great qualities. But, even if you were to teach some of these lessons to kids at that age, I'm not sure how well they would sink in. I think you need to sort of be out there in the real world before you say, oh, wow, this is really true. This is how things work.
So that seems like a good segue to some of your mistakes and the lessons learned. Give us one of them.
Well, I think the biggest lesson learned was I was one of those very gung-ho kids at the age of 26 who decided I was tired after a mere 6 years or so of working for other people. And, I think my biggest mistake was thinking that talent and ambition and sort of perseverance alone and a good work ethic would just automatically guarantee success. That there was nothing else I needed to learn. There were no other obstacles, that the fact that I had no startup funding and really no office space and no knowledge of even basic accounting, those were all things that were going to be completely secondary, and that, my business was going to take off instantaneously because I had talent.
Mm-hmm. And the reality?
Oh, well, as you well know, the reality is quite different. And I think the worst part of that reality, and the thing that probably hits creative people most, is that in order to run a company, you need to sell. You need to learn how to sell. You need to get over your fear of selling things, whatever discomfort you have with selling. And I think it's particularly hard for creative personalities to sort of, having to really continuously put yourself out there day after day and face a lot of rejection. People who don't call you back, projects that you think you're going to get and you didn't, and just continuously having to drum up that business.
Can you be more specific about what selling actually is? Because I think people imagine it certain ways, and I think it's a lot of cliches, actually. And I wonder, in your situation, what does it look like to sell?
Well, I think it took me personally a very long time to figure out what selling really meant, honestly. And I think this is where your point about cliches is very true. I had this idea, kind of don't want to offend anyone in sales, but I had this idea that sales, that's a dirty business. And I have to be pushy, and I have to be sort of self-promoting and slightly shameless, and cold calls, and just had these very vague ideas that were mostly negative. But in reality, what I learned over time is selling is going to be very different for everyone, and it's going to be very based on your personality. So for me, I am a pretty outgoing person, and so I actually enjoy going to networking events, for example, and chatting with people and meeting people. And, I've come to acknowledge that not every single contact is going to immediately turn into a sale, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, because sometimes it takes years before a contact you made somewhere and kept in touch with says, hey, I've got this person and they're looking for something. So sales is really more about building relationships with people, especially in a service industry where a lot of your business is going to come via referrals and based on your reputation and how you are to work with. And that's the part that took me a really long time to get. I had this attitude of, oh, well, they didn't write back or they didn't respond, or, oh, well, I checked with them once and there's no work available there. I wash my hands of this contact because I've got to move on and keep looking. So it's really about sort of personal relationship maintenance more than anything else. That's at least the way that I've seen it and come to understand it.
And so how do you maintain those relationships, you specifically?
So, obviously you can't maintain a lot. So I definitely try to go for quality over quantity. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm a small business owner and sales is just a part of what I do. My number one job is creative director here, so that has to be my number one priority. And so I quite literally maintain a list, and I try to keep it brief, no more than 30 to 40 people at a time of, people that I am currently keeping in touch with actively. And that can mean anything between, I give them a shout once a month to every few months, depending on location. Maybe we'll go grab a drink. Maybe we'll go get a cup of coffee. And, the key is to not be selfish about these relationships and sort of have this attitude of like, I need from you. It's a two-way street. So I'm always looking to see if these folks can use some help as well. No one's job is stable. There's been times where I'll go out with someone for a cup of coffee and find out that, their position just got cut. And so now they're in a situation where I may be of assistance. And so that's just kind of the way that I've approached it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking of, the specific tools that people use. It sounds like you're talking about in-person meetings, maybe a little email, picking up the phone, but literally, live, real-time maintenance of relationships, staying in touch with people.
Indeed. And, I'm not going to lie, we do rely on newsletters and email blasts and email marketing and all of the things that everyone else is doing. But for myself, what I genuinely enjoy and what I feel works best in the long term is really just the personal contact, because we are a service business.
Mm-hmm. And it also sounds like what you've described as you've learned over the years is a shift in your expectations about what the result of your marketing efforts and your selling efforts are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of patience, certainly, and a thicker skin, no doubt. But it's also just recognizing that, we do the best that we can. We continue to learn. Both my executive producer and I have different aspects of the sales cycle that we're responsible for. And we've learned who's good at what. And that's been very instrumental in sort of adjusting our expectations because, at first we were trying everything under the sun. And when none of it was working, it was like, oh my God, what are we doing wrong here? But now that we've narrowed it down to the few things that have actually worked over time, I think, our expectations are far more realistic in knowing how long it takes to sometimes land a project, and also how many times you land nothing at all. And you can't take it personally, I think is the biggest sort of long-term takeaway for me.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought of outsourcing the selling?
We did actually, for about a year, have a full-time accounts person.
Mm-hmm.
And, the truth of the matter is you need to really believe and have stake in what you're selling. And so after that year, my AP and I both realized that no one is going to put their heart and soul out there for this company the way that she and I will. And because we are a small business and because, our price tag on what we can afford to pay a sales person full time is much less than the going rate, even here in New York, for example. We just decided that it's best that we do it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that way we have full control of the process. We have, most importantly, we have control of the message. And because it's just us, the industry shifts so much, even in the 6 years that this company's been around. We've probably adjusted our pitch at least 4 to 5 times because it's been such a drastic change in the kind of work that we're doing, the kind of clients that we're getting, the kind of work that we want to do, the work that is more lucrative than other. And so, when you outsource that part of the process, there's just so much more potential for communication breakdowns. And I see how very large companies, of course, that's just part of the game. But for sort of the mom and pop shop, as we sometimes call ourselves, I really just found that no one does it better than the 2 key people at the helm.
And maybe this is related, but I know you have some strong opinions about the rise of clients asking for free work, or maybe you're talking about spec work, but how does that come into play?
Well, I think for a shop like ours, it really becomes a question of pay to play. It's not a question of opportunity seeking. Anytime someone asks us to pitch for free, it is taking time directly away from projects. We don't have 20 or 30 extra folks on staff who may be sitting around this week and can do the free boards or, a creative brief. And so I think, my biggest gripe with the free labor is that it really affects smaller business. An agency can handle free work. A creative studio of 100 people can handle the free work. Shops like mine cannot. And I know that there are far more shops like mine out there who are getting cut out of the loop here, frankly, just because we can't afford to take on these risks.
My understanding is that there are certain industries or markets in which this is very common practice and that's the expectation, and then other niches where no one would ever think of asking you to put time and effort and, present ideas, especially without going through some kind of discovery process.
Right. Well, I think when I first started working professionally, the first time I ever heard of this sort of free pitch practice was with respect to the large ad agencies. And there were many years where I thought, okay, well, that's how that process works. And it seemed fair because you're talking millions of dollars, multi-year contracts. There's really a lot of risk at stake. And then in the course of the last, 5-6 years, I've seen it trickle down to places where I would least expect it, budgets where it's just inexplicable how anyone would feel entitled to ask for free work when the amount they're paying for the work that they're asking is already far below standard. And so, I think it's just coupled with just overall economic trends towards people wanting things faster, cheaper, constantly. It seems they want them even faster and cheaper than yesterday, and even faster and cheaper still. And when you throw in this tendency of thinking that it's completely okay to ask for free creative work, because as we all know, with just the general shift in culture of, who pays for music anymore? We have Spotify, and that's the best case scenario because at least you're paying something. I think it's just the stigma of asking creative people for free work has really just been erased. And it's quite unfortunate.
I agree with you, and I do think it's our responsibility to stop it because the client certainly is not going to just stop asking. So maybe as a way to wrap up, you can share, if you have it, some language that creatives can use to resist and explain as much as possible to the client that this is not right.
Absolutely. The stance that I've taken is that unless we have a very established long-term relationship with a client, And we have very transparent scope of work and budget and expectations. We simply do not work for free. There are cases in which we will consider. I don't want to make this kind of a foot down absolute. We do examine these on a case-by-case basis. But again, unless I know you, and unless you're very transparent about what you're proposing, and I know that I am actually in the running because we have an established relationship, and you simply wouldn't call me as, budget filler, sort of, then the answer is always no. And it's a very firm no, saying, I'm sorry, we do not believe in putting our work out there for free.
Do you say it in person, verbally on the phone, in writing? What's the best way to communicate that message?
I think it depends. I think in person, I probably wouldn't put anyone on the spot. Like, let's say if I had gone into a meeting and at the end of the meeting it became obvious that there was a boatload of work that was being expected for free before we even got consideration on the job, I probably wouldn't be so blunt as to put people on the spot that way. But I would certainly email them afterwards. And then, a question of whether it's a phone call or an email depends on how it's asked. We've done both, certainly. And, sometimes it's a harsher line. I think I'm a lot more likely to just say it directly on the call if the scope of work is just so incredibly beneath the even option, right? Of asking me for anything free to prove myself. I think it does come down to, I think as a designer, just as a creative professional, you get to a point where you say, I've proved myself enough. This is our work. These are the folks who work with us, and they trust us. And if you feel that you can't trust us, then that's a really bad start to a relationship.
Interesting. All right. This has all been very enlightening. Maria, thank you.
Thank you, Elise.
And please tell the listeners where they can find more information about you.
Absolutely. So my studio is undefinedcreative.com. And then on top of that, I've just recently launched a site called Define Your Path. And that's at defineyourpath.co. And that contains a collection of all of my business and creative writing, as well as an option for folks who sort of want to get a consulting session to talk to me, because I do have a very, I think, unique way of looking at creative entrepreneurship kind of situations.
Thank you again, Maria.
Thank you, Elise.
You've been listening to the How Design Live podcast with Ilise Benun, the programming partner for How Design Live. You can subscribe to this podcast in the iTunes Store or on SoundCloud. We hope you found it both inspiring and practical, like everything HOWLive. And we hope to see you at the next How Design Live, May 2nd through 6th, 2017 in Chicago. Get all the details at www.howdesignlive.com.